Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Friday, September 12, 2025. First, Sonny knew the stakes had never been higher. The moment Drew opened his eyes at the hospital and, with a bitter edge in his voice, accused Michael of being the one who shot him, the air in Port Charles seemed to shift. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a loaded weapon aimed at the very heart of Sonny's family. Despite all the tension and disagreements Sonny had with Michael in the past, hearing Drew falsely name his son as his shooter was a line crossed too far. Sonny immediately recognized it not just as a lie, but as a declaration of war. Drew wasn't confused or mistaken, was calculated. Every word he uttered was chosen to destroy Michael's life and reputation, and Sonny couldn't let that happen, not now, not ever. As the hours unfolded, the danger for Michael intensified. The police took Drew's statement seriously, launching an investigation and putting Michael under immediate scrutiny. Even though there was no weapon found, no footage placing him at the scene, and no motive that made real sense, Drew's word carried weight, especially given his standing in the community. The timing couldn't have been worse. Michael had just begun rebuilding his relationship with Willow, and their family was finally finding its footing again. Now, his world was collapsing under a lie, and the one person who could have cleared his name, Jacinda, had suddenly vanished. It didn't take long for Sonny to realize that this was no coincidence. Jacinda's disappearance was strategic, intentional, and likely orchestrated to ensure that Michael had no alibi when he needed one most. Drew's hatred for Michael seemed to burn from a place far deeper than anyone could have anticipated. Sonny remembered every time Drew and Michael had exchanged cold glances, tense silences, and thinly veiled resentment. But this was pure vengeance. Sonny began piecing it together: Drew's growing frustrations, his political ambitions, his unresolved trauma from prison was redirecting all of it onto Michael. What Drew hadn't counted on was that Sonny still watched over his son, even from the shadows. Sonny had people in every corridor, whispers reaching him before the rest of the world even heard echoes. And what Sonny now heard was disturbing. There were rumors that Drew had been speaking to certain factions, manipulating people close to Jacinda, threatening anyone who might contradict his version of the story. Sonny knew time was not on his side. The longer Michael remained under suspicion, the harder it would be to dig him out. Legal representation could only do so much when the court of public opinion had already started to turn. Sonny needed to act, and not just defensively. He needed to go on the offensive to exonerate Michael and to expose Drew's lies. But this wasn't a typical mob retaliation. Sonny couldn't just make Drew disappear. Drew was too public, too politically connected. Instead, Sonny began crafting a meticulous plan. He called in favors from allies who owed him more than just gratitude. He reached into the legal system, into the press, and even the medical staff at the hospital. If Drew wanted to play a game of power, Sonny would show him what true power looked like. The first phase of Sonny's plan was to locate Jacinda. If she was alive, Sonny's people would find her. If she was being hidden or held against her will, he would expose whoever was involved. Through surveillance, hacked phone records, and old ties from the island network Drew had once infiltrated, Sonny began following the trail. What he uncovered was chilling. Jacinda had been spotted at a private airstrip days before the shooting, boarding a plane that never logged a return flight. The pilot was a known associate of someone connected to Drew's business ventures. That was all Sonny needed. He put pressure on the pilot's family until they talked. Within hours, Sonny had a destination and a plan to extract Jacinda safely. She was the key to clearing Michael, and Drew knew it. But Sonny wasn't content with just saving Michael. He needed to teach Drew a lesson that would echo for years. Behind the scenes, Sonny began feeding information to investigative journalists, discreetly planting seeds of doubt about Drew's recovery, his mental state, and even his motives. Sonny painted Drew as a man spiraling from untreated trauma and desperate for attention and control. More quietly, Sonny initiated a quiet probe into Drew's past financial transactions, knowing there were skeletons buried deep in those books-hidden accounts, offshore deals, and deals made during his time as CEO that could be construed as fraud. With each piece of evidence, Sonny was building a trap not to kill Drew, but to publicly and irreversibly dismantle him. Even with the pressure mounting, Sonny remained composed. He met with Michael privately and assured him that justice would prevail. But deep down, Sonny wasn't waiting on justice, he was creating it. He made it clear to his inner circle, Michael must walk free, and Drew must fall. For Sonny, this wasn't just about protecting his son, it was about restoring balance. If Drew thought he could rewrite reality and get away with it, he was gravely mistaken. Sonny had spent his life navigating betrayal, deception, and power struggles, and he'd never let anyone use lies to take down someone he loved. With each passing day, his plan grew tighter, more complete, and more dangerous. Sonny knew the final phase was coming. As the pressure on Drew increased, the cracks began to show. People around Drew grew uncomfortable. His allies in the hospital started backing away. His political sponsors stopped returning calls. Sonny watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. When Jacinda was finally brought back to Port Charles under heavy protection, she didn't hesitate to clear Michael's name. The damage had been done, but the tide was turning. Drew tried to discredit her, but Sonny was already steps ahead. He leaked medical documents, planted testimony, and ensured that Drew's credibility would collapse under scrutiny. And in the end, when Drew finally faced the weight of his actions, he realized too late that crossing Sonny had cost him everything. Second, Brennan approached Lulu with a clear sense of urgency. He had spent the last several days observing the volatile situation surrounding Valentine, and had come to the conclusion that the only path forward involved immediate cooperation from Lulu. Sitting across from her, Brennan presented his recommendations calmly but firmly, detailing the precarious state of Valentine's current condition. He explained that while Valentine remained under heavy scrutiny from multiple agencies due to his former dealings, he was also cooperating in key investigations that could potentially reduce his legal exposure. However, the real reason Brennan had reached out wasn't about Valentine's freedom, it was about Charlotte. Valentine had made it clear that he needed contact with his daughter, not only for emotional stability but also because he believed she could be in danger from enemies he had made along the way. Brennan's proposal wasn't light. He wanted Lulu to allow supervised visitation for Charlotte, ensuring Valentine could maintain a connection with his daughter while the legal situation unfolded. The agents involved would ensure that Charlotte was safe during every visit, and Valentine had even offered to remain under house arrest during the process. But Lulu, while listening carefully, remained visibly torn. Brennan sensed her hesitation, saw the fear flash behind her eyes, and understood that the image of Valentine as a dangerous man outweighed her ability to see him as a devoted father. Lulu had spent years guarding Charlotte from Valentine's more ruthless instincts, and even now, despite his willingness to comply with all terms, her maternal instinct overpowered any sense of compromise. As Brennan laid out more details for each Valentine had received, surveillance footage indicating Charlotte was being watched by unknown parties, and the very real possibility that Valentine's enemies could use her as leverage. Lu's expression hardened. She acknowledged the danger but seemed unwilling to accept the solution. She questioned whether exposure to Valentine might worsen Charlotte's safety, not improve it. Her words were cautious, but her message was clear. She didn't trust Valentine's world, and she didn't believe any amount of law enforcement oversight could change the inherent risks that came with it. Brennan tried to appeal to her reason, explaining that shutting Valentine out could create emotional confusion in Charlotte and blind spots in their protective efforts. Still, Lulu wavered. Brennan could feel the tension rising. He knew the stakes better than anyone had seen firsthand what happened to children caught between power struggles and vengeance. Charlotte wasn't just a pawn, she was a target. Valentine, for all his moral ambiguity and past offenses, was fiercely protective of his daughter and had already made sacrifices to shield her from his darker world. Brennan stressed that keeping Charlotte away would not erase the threats but might actually increase them, as she would be less prepared, less guarded, and more vulnerable without the awareness and guidance Valentine could provide. Lulu listened but said nothing definitive, her silence becoming increasingly frustrating for Brennan, who had hoped for quick resolution. Lulu's reluctance didn't come from hatred, it came from fear. She feared Valentine's enemies, yes, but she also feared the part of Valentine that remained unchecked. Despite his love for Charlotte, Valentine had a history of making unilateral decisions, of wielding power like a weapon. Lulu had witnessed how those choices left scars, and she wasn't sure she wanted to invite that chaos back into her daughter's life. Even if Valentine had changed, even if he was truly trying to do the right thing, she couldn't erase the past. Brennan saw her conflict and knew she was leaning toward denying the request, not out of malice, but out of protection. Still, from his standpoint, it was a critical mistake. Brennan's patience was wearing thin. He had expected resistance, but not complete hesitation in the face of mounting evidence and risk. With every hour that passed without a decision, Charlotte's safety became more fragile. Brennan reminded Lulu that the justice system wasn't perfect, and neither were families, but sometimes imperfect alliances were the only way to prevent disaster. He made it clear that this wasn't about trusting Valentine blindly, it was about trusting the system of oversight Brennan had personally designed. He had built a security protocol around the visits, involved neutral parties, and even arranged for emergency extraction procedures if anything went wrong. Yet Lulu remained non-committal. Finally, Brennan's composure cracked. He had tried logic, empathy, and protocol, but Lulu's indecision in the face of a looming threat was, in his eyes, not just frustrating, it was dangerous. He raised his voice slightly, not out of aggression but out of desperation. He told her flatly that her hesitation might lead to consequences none of them could take back. If anything happened to Charlotte while Valentine was being kept at arm's length, it would haunt all of them, but especially Lulu, who had the power to act now and didn't. Brennan wasn't trying to bully her, was trying to jolt her out of the fog of fear. Her inaction, to him, was reckless in the face of a storm already brewing. Despite Brennan's anger and sense of urgency, Lulu remained quiet as he left, torn between her fears and her responsibilities. She understood Brennan's logic and felt the weight of his warning, but something inside her still resisted. She needed time, though she knew time was the one luxury they didn't have. Valentine's darkness loomed like a shadow, but so did the potential cost of pushing him away. As Brennan exited, the echo of his frustration lingered in the room, a harsh reminder that indecision might carry the steepest price of all. Third, the unexpected return of Britt to Port Charles, delivered personally by Jason, sent ripples through the entire community. It wasn't just that Britt was presumed gone for good, it was the manner of her reappearance, cloaked in secrecy and orchestrated by Jason himself, that left people stunned and unsettled. For Dante and Lulu, the news struck a chord far deeper than mere surprise. In recent months, they had struggled to re-establish stability for their son, Rocco, amidst shifting alliances, emotional upheaval, and threats from both past and present. Britt's sudden re-entry into their world brought all of those fears crashing back into sharp focus, especially given her complex and mysterious history. It didn't take long before speculation turned into anxiety, and for Dante and Lulu, the safety of their son became the immediate priority. The emotional weight of the moment pressed heavily on both parents. They had spent years trying to shield Rocco from the darker elements of Port Charles' ruthless power struggles, dangerous vendettas, and morally gray figures who seemed to rise and fall like tides. But now, with Britt's return, the possibility that their son could once again be caught in the crossfire became very real. There were whispers that Britt's motivations for returning were not entirely pure. Some said she wanted to reclaim lost time. Others suggested that her reappearance was part of a larger scheme orchestrated behind closed doors. None of that mattered to Dante and Lulu as much as one terrifying question: what if Britt came back for Rocco? It wasn't a baseless fear. There had been times in the past when Britt had expressed maternal instincts, even obsessions, that deeply unsettled both Dante and Lulu. Though not Rocco's biological mother, Britt had once played a role in his early life that bordered on possessive, manipulating situations to insert herself into the family dynamic. Dante remembered the unease he felt whenever Britt was too close to Rocco, too eager to help, too emotionally invested in something that wasn't hers to claim. And now, with her return marked by secrecy and Jason's involvement, that old anxiety surged back to the surface. Dante and Lulu knew better than to ignore the instincts that had protected their son so far. As a detective, Dante had seen too many situations where people use children as leverage, as symbols, or worse, as pawns in their pursuit of redemption or revenge. He trusted Jason at least enough to believe that he wouldn't knowingly place Rocco in danger, but he didn't trust Britt's intentions, not yet. Jason's loyalty had always been complicated, often guided by his unwavering commitment to those he cared for, even if it meant turning a blind eye to their flaws. And Britt, despite everything, had long occupied a murky place in Jason's life. This only made Dante more determined to act swiftly and decisively, to ensure that no matter what story Britt told, no matter what emotions she tried to stir. Rocco would remain protected and untouchable. Lulu, for her part, struggled with a deep sense of dread. She had fought hard to give Rocco a sense of normalcy, to create a home where he could feel safe from the chaos that so often engulfed the adults around him. Seeing Britt walk back into the picture felt like a betrayal of that hard-earned peace. Even though Lulu understood the importance of second chances, even though she recognized that people could change, she wasn't willing to risk her son's emotional well-being on a gamble. For her, this wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation. She and Dante had endured enough heartache to know what was truly at stake. And they would not let anyone, not even someone Jason vouched for, cross that line again. Together, Dante and Lulu made a life-altering decision. They informed the proper authorities, secured legal documentation, and put into place a protective order that ensured Britt would have no access to Rocco unless specifically authorized by a court. It wasn't a decision made out of anger but out of necessity. They were determined to send a clear message not just to Britt, but to anyone who might consider involving Rocco in unresolved personal agendas. This child would not be used, influenced, or endangered. Their decision shocked many in the town, some of whom viewed it as premature or harsh, but for Dante and Lulu, it was an act of love and duty. The announcement rocked Port Charles. While most people celebrated Britt's return, the protective wall Dante and Lulu erected around Rocco became a symbol of deep parental resolve. Jason, though initially stunned by the news, respected their decision even if it complicated matters. He knew Britt's presence would always be divisive, and that her past choices couldn't be erased simply by reappearing with a new narrative. He assured Dante that Britt had no intentions of taking Rocco away, but Dante wasn't willing to build defenses based on hope. His job, as a father and a detective, was to anticipate threats, not wish them away. Behind closed doors, Britt learned of the restriction and was visibly shaken. Whether her intentions were sincere or not, the decision served as a reminder that actions from the past could echo loudly into the future. She claimed to have changed, to be back for reasons more noble than anyone suspected, but that didn't erase the history she had with Dante, Lulu, or their son. And while she could try to redeem herself in the eyes of others, she would have no direct access to Rocco unless she proved herself in ways that neither Dante nor Lulu could ignore. The challenge was steep, the consequences heavier than ever before. In the end, Dante and Lulu stood firm. Their bond as parents deepened under the pressure, and their resolve strengthened with every passing day that Rocco remained safe, smiling, and unaware of the storm gathering outside his home. They didn't know what the future would hold or how long Britt intended to stay, but they did know one thing with absolute certainty. No one, no matter how repentant, would come between them and their child again. In a town where loyalties shifted like sand and trust was a fragile currency, their love for Rocco became the unshakable foundation upon which they would defend their family no matter who tried to break through. Fourth, Anna had always trusted her instincts, and this time, they screamed louder than ever. The moment Drew accused Michael of shooting him, something didn't sit right with her. As a seasoned former WSB agent and experienced investigator, Anna had seen countless men lie under pressure, manipulate facts, and bend narratives to suit personal agendas. Drew's story was riddled with inconsistencies too clean, too rehearsed. She watched his body language, the controlled tone in his voice, and the calculated way he avoided certain questions. While others took his words at face value, Anna dove deeper, driven by an unshakable feeling that something darker was at play beneath the surface. Determined to uncover the truth, Anna launched her own investigation independent of the official casework. She started by retracing Drew's last known steps before the shooting. Surveillance footage from the area was conveniently missing, and witnesses were either unwilling to speak or had suspiciously vague recollections. It was as if someone had carefully wiped the trail clean. Anna's curiosity turned to alarm when she discovered that one of the security systems near the scene had been tampered with using a sophisticated digital override, something only a professional could execute. This was no random act of violence, and the further Anna followed the evidence, the more it pointed toward a setup. The most chilling discovery came when she uncovered communications between Drew and a third party weeks before the shooting. The messages were cryptic, but there were clear indicators of a plan being put into motion disguised under code words and phrases. Drew wasn't acting out of trauma or fear. He was playing a game, and Michael was the scapegoat. What terrified Anna even more was the possibility that Drew was not working alone. There were signs of external influence, possibly from someone with ties to the underworld or remnants of the WSB. Whoever orchestrated this had resources, reach, and a reason to silence anyone who got too close. Anna's heart raced as she put the pieces together. The fabricated accusation against Michael wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was part of something much larger. Perhaps it was meant to discredit Michael publicly, to weaken his ties to Sonny, or to disrupt alliances within Port Charles. Whatever the motive, the danger was escalating. Anna knew she was getting too close to something powerful, and that realization forced her to take a hard look at her own safety. She was no stranger to threats, but this felt different. It wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about surviving long enough to expose it. Realizing she could no longer rely on official channels alone, Anna began taking security precautions. She switched phones, encrypted her digital footprint, and stopped frequenting her usual spots. She even changed her routes home, alert to the possibility that someone was watching her movements. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. She'd seen what happened to people who got too close to secrets others wanted buried. The look in Drew's eyes the last time they spoke haunted her. It wasn't fear she saw, it was control. He was hiding something dangerous, and Anna was running out of time to figure out what it was. As her investigation deepened, Anna uncovered a suppressed report about a potential second shooter. A nearby witness had been interviewed the night of the incident but was later deemed unreliable and discarded from the case file. When Anna tracked down the witness herself, what she heard was bone-chilling. The man described seeing someone else at the scene, a figure matching no description previously made public, fleeing the area moments before Drew was found. The witness was terrified, having already received threats to keep quiet. Anna promised him protection, but she also knew it meant the stakes had now doubled. There was a real shooter out there, and Drew knew exactly who it was. Anna now understood the full gravity of what she was facing. The case wasn't just about proving Michael's innocence, it was about unraveling a conspiracy that had been carefully constructed. The web of lies was tightening, and Anna stood directly in its center. But she was no stranger to being the lone voice of reason in a sea of deception. She started documenting everything, that's recordings, even backups stored in encrypted locations. If anything happened to her, she wanted others to find what she found. It wasn't just about protection anymore, it was about accountability. If the truth couldn't come through her, then it had to come through the evidence she left behind. With the walls closing in, Anna began reaching out to old contacts from her WSB days, people she knew she could trust, even after years of silence. Some were hesitant, aware of how dangerous it was to get involved. Others offered to assist quietly, feeding her small pieces of intel that confirmed what she feared. Drew's version of events was being protected from the inside. Someone with influence wanted the case buried. The conspiracy stretched wider than she had anticipated, and every name she uncovered seemed to connect to another powerful figure with something to lose. Still, Anna pressed on, knowing that even if she had to stand alone, she would not back down. In the stillness of her home, behind locked doors and encrypted laptops, Anna prepared for what came next. She knew the truth would make her a target, but silence was not an option. If she had to dismantle the illusion one piece at a time, she would. For now, she kept moving, always watching over her shoulder, always one step ahead. The truth about who shot Drew was close, and Anna wasn't just determined to expose it, was ready to fight for it. Because in Port Charles, justice didn't come easily, and the only way to protect the innocent was to stand fearlessly in the face of danger. Finally, Elizabeth had always prided herself on staying neutral when it came to hospital politics, but this time, something inside her refused to remain silent. The news that Drew had regained consciousness and immediately pointed the finger at Michael as his assailant spread like wildfire through General Hospital. What struck Elizabeth first wasn't shock but suspicion. She had known Drew for years, through the many transformations and challenges he had faced, and something about his accusation didn't sit right. More troubling, however, was the fact that Drew had now demanded new medical oversight, citing discomfort with the original care team. Among the newly assigned was Lucas, a trusted and compassionate physician who had just begun to settle back into his routine. When Elizabeth heard the assignment, her instincts kicked in. She knew she had to say something before Lucas unknowingly walked into something far more dangerous than a patient's recovery. Elizabeth found Lucas in the staff lounge, sorting through patient files, his demeanor calm but focused. She watched him for a moment, weighing the right approach. Lucas, like herself, was dedicated and deeply empathetic, sometimes to a fault. She knew he would walk into Drew's room with an open heart, ready to help, but that was exactly what concerned her. Drew was not just any patient. This was a man who had returned from captivity, who had political aspiration, and who now stood at the center of a high-profile shooting case. His words carried weight, and his agenda, whether visible or not, could affect the lives of many. Elizabeth approached Lucas not as a colleague, but as a friend, and began carefully choosing her words. She told Lucas that she had seen sensible ones that Drew's mental state didn't align with what he was presenting outwardly. His calm demeanor, she explained, wasn't necessarily a sign of stability but possibly a calculated fade. Elizabeth recounted how Drew's expression barely changed as he delivered the accusation against Michael, how his eyes scanned the room not with confusion or fear, but with strategy. It wasn't just the accusation itself that disturbed her, it was the way he delivered it. She urged Lucas to remember that healing wasn't just about treating wounds or managing symptoms. In some cases, it required reading between the lines, understanding the layers of a person's intentions, especially when those intentions could be weaponized. Lucas initially pushed back gently, insisting that his duty was to provide unbiased care. But Elizabeth pressed on, making it clear that she wasn't asking him to abandon professionalism. She was asking him to stay alert. Drew had always been good at presenting the version of himself he wanted others to see. And now, with Michael's future hanging in the balance and Drew suddenly demanding a change in medical staff, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was underway. She pointed out that Drew's timing was too perfect to rehearse it, and it reeked of orchestration. If Lucas was going to step into the inner circle of this man's recovery, he needed to do so with eyes wide open. Elizabeth confided that she had seen patients like Drew before, men who had learned to manipulate empathy, to twist vulnerability into power. She warned Lucas that Drew might attempt to control the narrative of his care, use subtle suggestions to sway the medical record, or even attempt to cast doubt on those who questioned him. She reminded him that, as a physician, every note Lucas made, every observation he recorded, could eventually become part of a legal battle. The gravity of this case extended far beyond the hospital walls, and Drew's capacity to influence outcomes should not be underestimated. Elizabeth wasn't trying to alarm Lucas, but she wanted him to understand that healing this patient wasn't just a physical task, it was a psychological minefield. Lucas grew quiet, absorbing her words. He had seen manipulation before, even been caught in the web of it during his years in Port Charles. But Drew had never struck him as someone dangerous until now. Elizabeth's warning peeled back a layer of naivety he hadn't realized he still carried. He began to consider what Drew might gain from having specific people care for him, how he could manipulate empathy, bend documentation, or even use his medical condition as a smokescreen for ulterior motives. Lucas thanked Elizabeth quietly, realizing that she wasn't just offering professional advice, she was protecting him, guiding him away from a trap that few others could see forming. As Lucas left to begin his shift, Elizabeth remained uneasy. She had done her part, but she knew Drew wouldn't stop with one doctor or one lie. She suspected he had a larger plan, only that involved manipulating public sympathy, discrediting Michael, and painting himself as the victim. Whether his motive was revenge, political gain, or something deeper rooted in trauma, she couldn't say. But she knew that Lucas wasn't the only one who needed to be careful. Everyone around Drew was now potentially a pawn in his game, and if they weren't cautious, they'd find themselves entangled in a web of deception that could destroy careers, relationships, and reputations. Over the following days, Elizabeth kept a close eye on Drew's condition, noting the way he responded to different staff members, the questions he asked, the subtle deflections in his conversations. She documented everything carefully, not because she didn't trust her colleagues, but because she didn't trust the situation. Something about Drew's recovery felt staged, and her gut told her they hadn't seen the last of his manipulation. She also kept an open line with Lucas, checking in after each of his visits, gently prompting him to share anything that felt out of place. Slowly, Lucas began to see what she saw: Drew's strategic silences, his selective pain responses, and the way he pushed for sympathy while avoiding accountability. In the end, Elizabeth knew that protecting her colleagues sometimes meant confronting uncomfortable truths. She didn't hate Drew, but she no longer believed he was the man everyone wanted him to be. The pieces weren't adding up, and her instincts had rarely failed her before. She would continue doing her job, caring for patients, and upholding the integrity of her work, but she would also be watching, recording, and preparing. Because if Drew truly was lying about Michael, then exposing that lie would take more than evidence. It would take courage, vigilance, and people like her willing to sound the alarm before it was too late.